Welcome to Cinema Macabro, and this is your host, Jason Artiga. Today's episode, I'll be reviewing the 1986 cult vampire novel written by John Skipp and Craig Spector, The Light at the End. Now, when we think of the definitive vampire novel, we think of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was adapted as a movie in 1931 and directed by Todd Browning. We think of like Bela Lugosi saying, "I want to suck your blood," and numerous sequels and remakes by Hammer Films from the 50s and 60s. Now, about like the 70s, we started to see a change in vampire films and literature. Anne Rice brought the gothic vampire folklore to new heights with the Vampire Chronicles. And even her books had this like neo-gothic feel to them. Especially the latter books like The Vampire Lestat and The Queen of the Damned, which took place in modern times. Stephen King, he wrote Salem's Lot, giving us this great novella of people engulfed in the deep, dark secrets of a town and its hidden terror named Mr. Barlow, a vampire creating a small plague in the town of Salem's Lot. We started to, see this change of the times in the post-Vietnam era. Vampires became a metaphor for drug use, like in Bob Clark's 1973 cult film Death Dream or George Romero's Martin. Ganja and Hess, which was like a wonderful, dreamy vampire film, you guys got to see this film, was about the addiction of blood drinking. It also fit in this category. It was a metaphor for addiction. When the 80s came, the vampire film changed direction to like the changing times of the neon metropolis. Tony Scott's The Hunger showed what happened when you take the gothic vampire story and you set it into the 80s. You see how this vampire couple adapts to the times. Haha, New York. Where even a vampire comedy like Love at First Bite can show how the environment changes the traditional vampire story. We often see a fictional monster is thrown like a fish out of water only to adapt. To the purse snatchers, the garbage and the grittiness of New York City in the 1980s. Living in Manhattan in the 80s, I could remember the smell of garbage, seeing the needles on a playground, graffiti on the trains, boomboxes and breakdancing, arcades, drug sales, muggers, rapists. New York was at a state of disillusionment after the Vietnam War, and in the late 70s, having President Gerald Ford tell New York City to drop dead brought this transformation to full circle. The movie Death Wish showed actor Charles Bronson killing muggers and fighting back on the subway as he blasted them with a .32 caliber. We saw De Niro do the same in Taxi Driver while slowly descending into the madness of the city. We had a Bernard Goetz, a young man who had enough of being a victim and blasted 4 would-be attackers on the news. New York was in a crime rave, where the predators stalked their prey on New York City subways late at night, where the gangs depicted in the movies, the warriors rolled up in packs. Even video games cashed in the late-night subway night violence using New York City not only as an inspiration, but a model. New York was regarded at one time as the rotten apple, with its seedy Times Square, burning Bronx. The big city was a horror story in its own. Movies like Wolfen, a werewolf movie, based on a novel by Whitley Strieber, was shot in burnt-down, demolished areas of the South Bronx. During his time in the mid-'80s, Clive Barker wrote the horrific short story The Midnight Meat Train, an entry in his book Books of Blood, where a killer named Mahogany bludgeons his victims to death with a slaughterhouse mallet. This was the definitive splatterpunk story, with others that followed. I read this back in '85, and it scared the shit out of me. Being too young to ride the subway by myself, it left me scared, squeamish, but wondering what was out there late at night in the city subway. I was completely fascinated of this new era of horror, the splatterpunk horror. The punk subculture was popular in New York City. CBGB's and the Lower East Side were just a few epicenters for performances of punk music. The heroin-ridden Tompkins Square Park came into play where punks gathered, sang songs of disillusionment and broken dreams and the anger that they had for the country and for the establishment. Splatterpunk was a new direction in horror, one that not only intensified the violence and gore, but brought horror into a gritty reality of real locations, real places, economic situations, whatever it may be. It was the gritty reality that horror needed. The Light at the End was first conceived from author Craig Spector after witnessing a violent mugging. He was so inspired, he got with his collaborator John Skipp about the idea, and the two, they got with writing and came up with the idea for a vampire novel that was grounded in the reality of the mid-80s New York City. The two worked as messengers for a courier service and used their experience on the job. This was an inspiration for some of the characters in the book. The Light at the End centers around Rudy Pashko, a drug-addicted punk who's a major douchebag. This guy's a fucking asshole. He finds himself in a strange situation when he's attacked by an ancient vampire who grants him immortality. Rudy then becomes drunk with power and bloodlust, but still has his old addictions as drugs when he was a human. And as a vampire, his addictions intensify. Rudy starts murdering victims on the subway system to fuel his thirst and create havoc on the city with fear of this killer stalking people late at night. Now, the protagonist of the book is Joseph Hunter and his cohorts, Rudy's friend Steven and his pals Alan, Ian, and Rudy's ex-girlfriend Jocelyn. Hunter is written like this fiery-tempered man who feels like this is his responsibility to find and destroy Rudy like a modern-day vampire hunter. He's written sort of like, almost like an anti-hero, but really with heroic qualities. He's more like the modern hero. Now, I really love the narrative of The Light at the End. It was gritty, scary, funny, and at times it made me long for the old New York. I love the characters in this book. A lot of the characters are artists, couriers, messengers, people with real occupations. So you can identify, like, I'm a New Yorker, and I pretty much identified with pretty much everybody in this book because they were written to be fleshed out characters. They felt real. They felt like I knew them. And whoever dies in a book, it just makes you feel bad because it's just like you have this connection, you know? And that's what I like about the writing of John Skipp and Craig Spector. These guys managed to capture a really good essence of New Yorkers in this novel. And that's the thing with Splatterpunk. It's not just the violence, but also like the characters felt real and three-dimensional. They weren't just cannon fodder. A known fact is the book inspired writer-director Joss Whedon, and he wrote an episode introducing the vampire Spike, which was inspired by The Light at the End. He not only based Spike's look on Rudy, but he also wrote a scene where Spike fights a vampire hunter on a New York City subway train in 1977. Spike is one of my all-time favorite vampires, and this inspiration was definitely evident. For some time, The Light at the End was out of print for years, and it wasn't until like 2011 that it was re-released on Amazon under digital format. I personally bought the paperback in 2007 after I was recommended by my boss and friend Mike that The Light at the End was an amazing vampire book, and a lot of people didn't know about it, maybe because it being out of circulation for a while from Bantam Press. I really love this book, and my final words is read the thing. If you really like the gritty vampire and you don't like that Twilight bullshit, that candy ass sissy vampire, no, this ain't it. You know, this book has a wonderful third act that is just so gritty and just so action packed. Both Craig Spector and John Skipp, they write at such a pace that is just really good. And it's not just fast, it's just more of it builds up suspense, but at the same time has this steady pace that I really like. Go buy this book. It's awesome. You like vampires? I strongly recommend you read The Light at the End. And thank you for watching this video. And if you got any comments, please leave them in the comment box, and please hit the subscribe button. Until then, I'll see you guys at the next episode.